What we're most concerned with as Oxfam is the impact upon people who live in poverty. And for people who live in poverty, they spend a very large share of their income on the basic necessities of life, often up to 70% of their income on food alone. So if you see a rise in the price of food, and particularly a short-term rise in the price of food, you will see people having to go without food, or also having to give up essentials like education for their children or healthcare. And this can have devastating consequences for them in the short term, but also on the long-term chances of their families to have fruitful and productive lives into the future.
To what extent do speculators contribute to the crisis?
Well, it's hard to say. We think we should take a precautionary approach to the speculation. What we do see is very unstable food prices. And if you look at the prices on the markets, they go up and down virtually on a daily basis. And some days you see very large increases or decreases in food prices. At the same time, we see major international trading companies like Cargill have very large profits over this period of time. And so what we think we need to do is have a precautionary approach to make sure we adequately regulate speculation on food, and make sure that food isn't an item to be played with on the markets, but is dealt with seriously, and one that our primary objective must be to ensure that people have enough food to eat at the end of the day.
In Croatia, people spend 30% of the average income or even more on food. What does that figure tell us?
Well, it shows us that food, even for developed countries like Croatia, is extremely important. And I'm sure for the poorer sections of society, they'll spend even greater amounts of their income on food. And so we need to be very conscious about the impact that food increases in food prices will have on poverty. Here in our northern countries, but also more importantly, I think, for those who really live on the margins in developing countries. And that's billions of people we're talking about who are at risk, not just in Croatia, but also in Ireland, the United States, and more importantly in Latin America, Africa and Asia.
Oxfam claims that the present EU agricultural policy is wrong. Can you explain us that?
Yeah, we've had concerns about the European Union's agricultural policy for many years. In particular, its impact upon when the European Union was exporting low-cost goods into developing countries and dumping agricultural produce into developing countries and affecting the lives and livelihoods of poor farmers in those countries. Now, one issue that we're very much concentrated on is biofuels. And the European Union is creating demand for biofuels by legislation within the European Union to feed into road transport. And we feel that is feeding demand for biofuels crops, which are taking away from food available for people to eat. And it's driving food price volatility. So with less food around in the marketplace, because it's being used for fuel, it means that food prices spike more continuously, higher food prices, and that leads to devastating consequences for people living in poverty.
What kind of measures does Oxfam suggest to world leaders in order to avoid the worst-case scenario?
Well, we think a big part of the solution is to invest in the poor themselves. So ironically, many of the hungriest people in the world are themselves farmers. But unfortunately, they don't have access to the investment that they need in order to be able to grow sufficient amount of crops to feed themselves, their families and their communities. So we think for those 500 million small-scale food producers that we need to be investing in them, and they can provide the food to the hungriest people in the world. In addition to that, we must tackle the other problems which are causing the broken food system. So climate change being number one. Climate change is a problem that we face now, and it will get worse and worse and worse over the coming decades, and predicted to be 5 or 6 degrees of global warming. If world leaders don't urgently tackle this issue, we will see a broken food system, not just now, not just the 900 million people who already go hungry, but we'll see billions more go hungry into the future.
Mr. Roach, thank you very much for being our guest.
Thank you very much.
A za kraj, Boro Vučković vodi nas u nekada naše omiljeno šoping odredište, Trst. Usporedio je tamošnje cijene hrane s našima i jasno vam je tko je u minusu. Naime, iako i u Italiji PDV ima uzlaznu putanju, a trenutačno iznosi 21%, na osnovne živežne namirnice godinama se nije mijenjao i daleko je manji.
Lani, sredinom rujna, Italija je podigla stopu PDV-a s 20 na 21%. To je u godinu dana napunilo državnu blagajnu za dodatnih gotovo 5 milijardi eura, ali do 2014. za kakvu takvu stabilizaciju talijanskog proračuna potrebno je uštedjeti 11 puta više. Zato se ove jeseni razmišlja o ponovnom povećanju stope PDV-a i to na 23%. Sve se to odražava i na standard prosječne talijanske obitelji, čiji su godišnji troškovi samo po toj stavci porasli za više od 600 eura i sve se teže spaja kraj s krajem, slično kao i u nas.
La gente compra molto di meno, è molto più attenta ai prezzi, confronta molto più attentamente la qualità e da dove proviene il pesce anche.
Za našu priču, međutim, važno je da se PDV, odnosno IVA, nije već 2 desetljeća mijenjala za osnovne prehrambene proizvode, te za neke proizvode široke potrošnje i usluge. Konkretno, na kruh, mlijeko, većinu povrća, novine i knjige dodaje se 4%, a na većinu voća, meso i ribu, lijekove, javni prijevoz, kulturna događanja i hotelsko-ugostiteljske te mnoge medicinske usluge stopa je tek 10%. Put nas je doveo u središte Trsta na poznati Ponte Rosso.
U Trst i njegovu okolicu danas se dolazi uglavnom po prehrambene namirnice. Ponte Rossu, kakvog se sjećaju starije generacije, više nema ni traga. Tu je tek nekoliko štandova sa voćem i povrćem, ribom, cvijećem, a prava kupovina preselila se u velike shopping centre.
Costava di meno, in effetti si riusciva a mettere via di più ogni mese. Adesso non riesco a mettere via quasi niente perché anche la situazione della famiglia è cambiata, mio figlio fa l'università, le spese sono di più, i costi sono più alti, i servizi sono più cari, le bollette, l'elettricità, l'acqua, però insomma passerà, in qualche modo si sopravvive, ecco.
Ima još nešto, to će vam potvrditi mnogobrojni Hrvati koji opsjedaju tršćanske supermarkete. Većina proizvoda je kvalitetnija i jeftinija nego u Hrvatskoj. Tjestenina, ulje, maslac, riža, pršut, čokolada, deterđent, tuna, kava, sir, masline, ulje, vino i pelati i da ne nabrajamo dalje, stoje znatno manje nego u Hrvatskoj, a bolje su ili iste kvalitete. A povrat IVA pokrije troškove goriva.
Došli smo iz Rijeke.
I što vas je dovelo u Trst?
Došli smo samo kupiti cipele.
Ali ušli ste u prodavaonicu prehrambenih namirnica. Zašto?
Dobro, tu mislimo kupiti kavu. Tako da uvijek kupujemo maslino ulje i kavu. Uvijek to kupujemo u Italiji.
I prašak.
I prašak. Ali prašak, ja mislim da je i kod nas jednaka cijena kao i ovdje.
Kriza zakida, možemo reći, srednji stalež, a onda možemo i zamisliti kako su niži staleži u koji su oni tek krizi. Trst ima jedno jako razvijeno financijsko stanje u smislu tu su javne službe, tu su banke, tu su osiguranja. Međutim, onaj industrijski, radnički stalež je sve siromašniji.
Prosječna talijanska obitelj, za razliku od prosječne Hrvatske, više troši na režije i automobil nego na prehrambene proizvode. Ali kao i u nas, očekuje se daljnji pad kupovne moći i rast nezaposlenosti. Uz to, Talijani se uzdaju u sreću mnogo više nego Hrvati. Na igre na sreću potroše godišnje oko polovice onog što izdvoje za hranu. To je vrtoglavih 70 milijardi eura ili, ako sam dobro izračunao, oko 5 hrvatskih ovogodišnjih proračuna. Dovoljno da se živi u nadi i očekivanju boljih vremena.
A mi se nadamo da ćete i sljedećeg četvrtka biti s nama. Govorimo o još jednoj temi koja je ljetos podignula puno prašine u Hrvatskoj, a to je problem zbrinjavanja otpada. Kroz Paralele će vas voditi Goran Rotim. Cijenjeni gledatelji, hvala vam i doviđenja.